The evening began like any other for the young waitress, who moved quietly through the restaurant with a soft smile and calm hands. She had been working there for a few months, long enough to understand the flow of the place, yet still unfamiliar enough that many guests barely noticed her. The restaurant was known for high-end dining, tall windows, velvet chairs, and wealthy customers who expected perfection in every detail. For her, though, it was simply a job she tried to do well, one shift after another. She arrived a little early that night, tying her apron gently and pushing back a strand of hair that always fell near her cheek. The rest of the staff greeted each other loudly, sharing jokes or talking about plans after work, but she liked staying on the side, listening more than speaking. She believed that if she worked quietly and kept her focus, the hours would pass smoothly. The restaurant was preparing for a special private dinner. A group of influential guests had reserved the biggest section of the dining hall. They were known for being demanding, and the manager had been repeating instructions since morning. Every glass needed to shine, every napkin needed perfect folds, and the mood of the place had to feel warm and elegant. A live pianist had been booked for the night, something that didn't happen often. The gentle sound of the piano would mix with the soft light hanging from the golden ceiling lamps, creating the perfect atmosphere. The waitress moved across the room, adjusting plates and checking silverware. She never complained about being given the less glamorous tasks. She knew her place in the team. She was the kind of person who did her work with quiet pride, even if nobody praised her for it. When she wiped the surface of the grand piano that stood near the corner, she paused for a moment. Her fingers brushed lightly over the glossy wood, and for a second her reflection looked back at her. It reminded her of old days she rarely talked about. Once, music had been a big part of her life, but life had changed direction, and those days lived only inside her now. She took a small breath, stepped away from the piano, and went on with her tasks. By late evening, the restaurant filled with busy movement. The kitchen staff hurried in and out, trays clattered gently, and the manager walked around checking every detail twice. The waitress worked silently beside other servers, placing menus, refilling water, and preparing the space for the arrival of the guests. She could feel the tension in the air, the kind that always came before a big night. When the guests finally arrived, the atmosphere shifted. Expensive perfume, polished shoes, and confident voices filled the room. They walked in as if they owned the space, laughing loudly, their expressions sharp and alert. The waitress stepped aside, holding a tray close to her chest, watching as the manager rushed to greet them with a smile so wide it seemed almost painful. She followed instructions carefully, taking drink orders and serving them with steady hands. The guests hardly looked at her, but she didn't mind. She had learned long ago not to take things personally. Some people saw waitstaff as shadows moving around them, and she had accepted that. Still, there was something about this night that felt different. Maybe it was the way the lights were dimmed slightly more than usual, or the soft chatter from the other side of the dining hall. Maybe it was the grand piano standing quiet in the corner, waiting for the evening to begin. The hired pianist had not arrived yet, and the manager kept glancing at the door nervously. As time ticked by, the guests settled into their seats and looked around as if expecting entertainment to start immediately. The waitress stood near the wall, watching the door with the same concern as the manager, though she didn't show it. She could feel the tension growing. The pianist was supposed to begin before the main course, but there was still no sign of him. The manager checked his phone again, pacing near the bar. The waitress continued her work, moving quietly, but her attention drifted toward the front entrance. Finally, the door flung open, not with grace, but with panic. The pianist rushed inside, holding his side, breathing heavily. His face was pale, and sweat dripped from his temples. The manager hurried to him. "What happened?" He whispered sharply. The pianist shook his head, apologizing over and over, explaining he had severe pain in his stomach and couldn't perform. Before the manager could respond, the man stumbled out again, nearly collapsing outside the entrance. The staff exchanged nervous looks. The guests began to murmur, confused, and impatience slowly filled the room. The waitress felt the air tighten. Without music, the special dinner would lose its charm, and the wealthy guests were not known for their patience. She watched the manager wipe his forehead with trembling fingers. He whispered things under his breath, probably thinking of every bad outcome that could follow. The guests began asking questions. Some lifted their brows, others tapped their fingers on the table, already irritated. The manager tried to keep a calm face, promising that everything would be handled. The waitress stood near the edge of the room, feeling a strange pressure in her chest. She didn't like seeing anyone panic, especially when she knew exactly how. It felt. Her eyes shifted toward the grand piano again, its polished surface reflecting the dim lights. She swallowed gently. Her heart whispered something she had been trying to ignore for years. She had not played in a long time, not since life became complicated and dreams had to be pushed aside. But she still remembered the feeling of sitting on a piano bench, her fingers moving like they were telling a story. The thought scared her a little. This wasn't her world anymore. She was a waitress, not a performer, and surely no one would take her seriously if she said she could play. Still, the room felt heavier with every passing second. The manager looked helpless, and the guest's mood was getting worse. Something inside her pushed forward, a quiet voice encouraging her to speak. She stepped closer to the manager, her steps slow and careful. She waited until he turned to face her, his expression tired. "I can help," she said softly. He blinked, confused. "Help with what?" "We need a pianist." Her hands trembled slightly behind her apron, but she steadied her voice. "I can play." The manager stared at her for a long moment, unable to understand if she was joking or serious. The other staff members stopped what they were doing, their eyes widening with surprise. The guests, noticing the sudden pause, watched with curiosity. The waitress looked down for a moment, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes. "I can try," she said quietly. "If you want." The manager let out a small laugh, not mocking, but disbelieving. "You?" He whispered. "You can play the piano?" She nodded. Once, he glanced at the restless guests, then back at her. He had no options left, and they both knew it. With a sigh, he said, "Fine, but if this goes badly—" He didn't finish the sentence. She understood. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she approached the grand piano. Every step felt like waking up a part of her she had locked away long ago. She sat down gently, touching the keys with the tips of her fingers. They felt familiar, almost like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The room fell silent. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. The wealthy guests leaned forward ever so slightly, skeptical but curious. The staff held their breath. For a moment, she hesitated. Her hands rested above the keys, shaking a little. Then she closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and allowed her fingers to move. The first notes were soft, almost shy. But as the melody grew, her hands began to glide smoothly, unlocking something deep inside her. The quiet in the room turned into stillness, a kind that meant everyone was listening. With each note, her confidence grew. She played as if the piano had been waiting for her. The sounds filled the restaurant, rising and falling like calm waves. Guests who had been annoyed moments ago now sat in silence. Mesmerized, the manager stared at her, speechless, as if he had never truly seen her before. The waitress didn't think about the people watching her. She didn't think about her job, the pressure, or the fear of being judged. She just played, letting the music speak for her in a way she never could with words. The night that had begun as ordinary was changing, quietly but surely. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment would mark the beginning of a chapter she had long forgotten she deserved. But for now, she simply played, letting the music turn the room into something warm, beautiful, and unforgettable. The restaurant had never felt so tense. After the pianist's sudden illness, everyone seemed to be holding their breath, unsure of what to do next. The wealthy guests were seated in their large, comfortable chairs, their eyes flicking from one server to another. Some whispered quietly, casting glances toward the manager, whose forehead glistened with sweat. The waitress, standing silently near the corner, felt the weight of the situation pressing against her chest. She had never seen so many people depend on a single night to go perfectly. The manager walked quickly to the piano and looked down at the keys, as if the empty instrument itself held the answers. The staff hovered near the dining area, adjusting chairs and placing silverware, pretending everything was normal, though their nerves betrayed them. Plates were still steaming in the kitchen, and the smell of roasted meats and fresh bread filled the room. But the mood had shifted. There was no music, no calm background to soften the anxious voices. She watched the guests shift in their seats, some leaning forward to ask questions about the wait, others checking their phones. One guest tapped impatiently on the marble table, while another sipped wine and shook their head ever so slightly. The whispers and murmurs grew louder as the minutes passed. The pressure on the manager mounted with every passing second. He was clearly panicked, but tried to maintain a polite, controlled expression. The waitress could see the fear in his eyes and in the eyes of the staff around her. They were all thinking the same thing. How could they save this night? The piano had been a key part of the evening, a symbol of elegance that the guests had expected from the moment they had made their reservation. Without music, the whole dinner felt incomplete. The pianist's absence left a void not only in the sound of the room, but also in the air itself. The soft hum of conversation was now sharp, brittle. The wealthy guests glanced around, as if looking for something or someone to fill that silence. It was a space that needed to be occupied, and nobody knew how the waitress's eyes kept returning to the grand piano. It had always fascinated her, even as a child, and she had spent years imagining herself playing for a room full of people, telling stories with her fingers on the keys. But those were dreams from another life, dreams that had been buried under the reality of bills, responsibilities, and daily routines. Still, the feeling that something could happen tonight stirred inside her. A quiet pull she couldn't ignore. She shifted on her feet, feeling a nervous energy building. It was strange, the way her heart seemed to whisper, telling her she could do more than serve drinks and carry trays. She had learned to move quietly through life, to keep her talent hidden. But the emptiness in the room called to her, and she could feel a tug at her courage. Meanwhile, the manager's voice cut through the tension as he tried to reassure everyone. "Please, we are working on it. Everything will be fine," he said. To the guests, though his hands betrayed him, shaking slightly as he straightened the tablecloths. The staff nodded and whispered encouragement to each other, but the unease lingered. The guests began to murmur again. One leaned over to another, remarking about the missing entertainment, while another waved a hand at the manager in a subtle gesture of impatience. The waitress felt the walls closing in, a pressure she had never experienced before. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had faced tough situations before. But this was different. This was a test that went far beyond serving food or refilling wine. Then, without fully realizing it, she found herself stepping forward. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a few slow steps toward the piano. The room seemed to grow quiet around her, and even the murmurs of the guests slowed to nothing. The manager noticed her movement and stopped mid-step. His brow furrowed in surprise. "I can help," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager blinked, looking from her to the piano, then back to her. He seemed to think she might be joking. "You?" he asked, disbelief clear in his voice. "You can play the piano?" Her hands flexed nervously. "Yes." "I can try," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "If you want me to." The manager hesitated, glancing at the guests. Some had begun to notice the exchange, their curiosity piqued. There was a moment of silence as he weighed his options. They had no other choice. The pianist was gone, and the atmosphere needed to be saved. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. "Fine, but—" "Do your best," he said, not sounding very confident. The waitress walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last, but her determination grew. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, some skeptical, some genuinely curious. The staff stood back, uncertain whether to watch or move away. She reached the bench, brushed her fingers over the smooth keys, and felt the familiar texture beneath her fingertips. The piano seemed to welcome her touch, as if it had been waiting for this moment. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then sat down and adjusted the bench. The room seemed to hold its breath. The guests leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the unexpected development. The manager stepped back, crossing his arms, unsure whether this would be a disaster or a miracle. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes, recalling the countless hours she had spent playing in the past, the way music could tell a story without words. She took a deep breath, letting her memories guide her. Slowly, she pressed the first key, letting the note fill the silence. It was soft, tentative, but true. The note seemed to hang in the air, catching the attention of everyone in the room. The guests' whispers faded as they turned to listen. The waitress's fingers moved, finding a rhythm that felt natural, her hands beginning to glide across the keys. The sound was warm and delicate, a gentle melody that grew slowly, filling the dining hall with a sense of calm. She opened her eyes slightly, noticing the guests leaning in, their expressions changing from skepticism to intrigue. Even the manager seemed unable to look away, his anxiety giving way to wonder. The staff around her relaxed a little, smiles forming on their faces as they realized the music was transforming the room. The waitress lost herself in the notes, her fingers dancing across the keys with increasing confidence. Each note carried emotion, each chord a story. She did not need to speak, for the music spoke for her. The tension that had gripped the restaurant moments before began to ease, replaced by a soft, enchanting atmosphere. The guests, who had been frowning and tapping impatiently, now sat in quiet awe. Some closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be carried away by the melody. Others whispered softly to their companions, marveling at the unexpected talent of the young waitress who had stepped up in a moment of crisis. The manager's expression softened as he watched her. He realized that the night, which had seemed doomed only moments ago, was being saved by someone he had underestimated. The waitress, who had often gone unnoticed, was now the center of attention, commanding respect with her skill and courage. As she played, the room transformed. The wealthy guests, who had arrived expecting a simple dinner, were now experiencing something magical. The music wrapped around them, softening their worries, making the evening unforgettable. The staff smiled at each other, silently acknowledging the extraordinary moment unfolding before them. The waitress continued to play, her confidence growing with each note. The melody became more expressive, more complex, yet it flowed effortlessly from her fingers. She did not think about the past, the future, or her life outside the restaurant. For these moments, she existed solely in the music, creating a world of beauty that everyone in the room could share. The guests leaned back in their chairs, captivated by her performance. The sound of the piano seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant, reaching even those in the kitchen who had stopped their work to listen. The waitress's playing was no longer just an attempt to save the night. It was a gift, a reminder of what was possible when courage met opportunity. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer. Then, slowly, the guests began to clap. It started quietly, almost hesitant, but grew louder as more people joined in. The manager smiled, a mixture of relief and pride on his face. The staff exchanged glances, amazed at the unexpected turn of events. Waitress sat back slightly, her hands resting on the keys. Her heart was pounding, and a small smile appeared on her face. She had faced her fear, stepped into the unknown, and created something beautiful. The music had transformed not only the room, but also her own sense of self. The wealthy guests approached her after the performance, some offering compliments, others asking questions about her background. She listened politely, responding with quiet humility, still processing the extraordinary experience she had just shared. The manager came over, placing a hand on her shoulder, silently expressing his gratitude. That night, the restaurant had seen a miracle of sorts. A quiet, hard-working waitress had stepped forward in a moment of need, revealing a hidden talent that would change the way everyone saw her. The evening, which had begun with tension and worry, ended with awe and admiration, leaving a mark on everyone present. And as the guests continued their dinner, talking quietly about the unexpected performance, the waitress returned to her work, her heart light and her mind buzzing with possibility. She knew that something had shifted within her, that the night had opened a door to a future she had long imagined but never dared to pursue. The story of this night would be told again and again, a memory that would linger like the final, perfect note of a beautiful song. The evening had taken an unexpected turn, and the restaurant buzzed with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The guests, who had arrived expecting a quiet, elegant dinner with a touch of live music, found themselves captivated by the young waitress who had taken the piano in a moment of desperation. The manager, once anxious and frazzled, now watched, with a mixture of awe and relief, unable to believe what had just happened. The waitress herself sat at the grand piano, fingers lingering over the keys as she took a deep breath. Her heart was still pounding, a rhythm that matched the energy in the room. She could feel eyes on her, not with judgment this time, but with genuine curiosity and admiration. It was a strange sensation, being noticed for something she had hidden for so long, something she had never dared to show. She began to play again, this time with more confidence. The melody flowed naturally, her fingers moving with a grace she hadn't felt in years. Each note carried emotion, telling a story of perseverance, quiet strength, and untapped potential. The sound seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant, reaching the farthest tables where the wealthiest guests sat, their expressions softening as they listened. The staff, who had once been skeptical of her abilities, now watched in silence, their previous doubts replaced by admiration. They could feel the transformation taking place, the room shifting from a place of tension to one of warmth and beauty. The waitress played without hesitation, letting the music guide her, letting herself be seen and heard in a way she had never experienced. Some guests reached for their phones, discreetly recording the moment, knowing that what they were witnessing was rare and extraordinary. Others simply closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them, forgetting for a moment the worries and expectations that had accompanied their arrival. The atmosphere was no longer tense. It was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. Manager approached quietly, standing near the back of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He had always known the waitress was competent, diligent, and capable of handling the demands of the restaurant, But this was something entirely different. This was talent, raw and authentic, shining in the most unexpected of ways. He felt a swell of pride and a hint of guilt for ever doubting her dot. As the music continued, the waitress began to experiment with the melody, adding small flourishes and variations that showcased her skill. She could feel the energy in the room, the way the guests were responding, and it encouraged her to take small risks, to push the boundaries of what she thought she could do. Each chord resonated with confidence, each note telling a story of hidden potential, finally brought to light. The wealthy guests, many of whom had attended countless dinners and events, were genuinely impressed. They whispered among themselves, commenting on the unexpected talent of someone who had seemed ordinary, almost invisible, just moments before. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities were hidden in the most unlikely. One guest, in particular, leaned forward, eyes wide with fascination. They had seen many performances, but this was different. There was something personal, something real about the way she played. It wasn't just technique or skill. It was emotion, sincerity, and the courage to step forward when it mattered most. The guest exchanged a glance with another, silently. Agreeing that they had witnessed something remarkable, the waitress's mind wandered briefly to the past, to the years when she had dreamed of performing, of sharing her music with the world. Life had taken her down a different path, and she had buried those dreams beneath responsibilities and reality. But in this moment, those dreams had resurfaced, stronger and more alive than ever. She felt a connection to her past self, to the little girl who had imagined herself playing for an audience, and it filled her with a quiet joy. The music swelled, rising and falling like the tides. The melody became more intricate, more expressive, and the guests listened in rapt attention. The staff exchanged amazed glances, realizing that they were witnessing not just a performance, but a moment that would be remembered for years. Waitress had turned what could have been a disaster into an unforgettable experience. The manager, unable to contain his admiration, stepped closer, subtly signaling his approval to the staff. He knew that this performance had changed everything. The night, which had begun with tension and uncertainty, was now one of celebration, a testament to the power of courage and talent. He couldn't help but feel grateful that the waitress had stepped forward, that she had trusted herself enough to take a risk. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer. Then, slowly, the guests began to clap. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, but grew louder and more enthusiastic as everyone joined in. The sound of applause echoed through the dining hall, filling the space with warmth and appreciation. The waitress sat back slightly, her fingers resting on the keys, her heart racing with a mix of relief and pride. Some guests approached her, offering compliments and asking questions about her background. She responded with quiet humility, smiling softly and acknowledging their praise without arrogance. The manager stood nearby, beaming with pride, silently expressing his gratitude for her bravery and skill. The staff, inspired by what they had just witnessed, returned to their duties with renewed energy, carrying the magic of the moment with them. The guests returned to their meals, now enjoying the dinner with a sense of wonder and satisfaction that had been missing earlier. The waitress continued to play softly in the background, adding gentle touches to the atmosphere, enhancing the experience without drawing attention away from the conversation. Her music had transformed the evening, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. As the night progressed, the young waitress found herself approached by a few of the guests individually. One influential guest, clearly impressed, asked about her musical background, inquiring if she had ever considered performing professionally. The waitress smiled politely, explaining that life had taken her in a different direction, that her music had been a private passion until now. The guest nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by her honesty and talent. The manager, watching from a distance, realized that this moment had shifted not only the guest's perception of the waitress, but also his own. He had always known she was hard-working and capable, but this display of talent and courage revealed a side of her that he had never seen before. He made a mental note to ensure that her efforts were recognized, knowing that this night would change her position in the restaurant, if not her entire future. The staff, inspired by her performance, felt a renewed sense of pride in their work. They had seen someone step up in a moment of crisis, turning potential failure into triumph. It was a lesson in courage, resilience, and the hidden potential within every person. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary moments arise from the most ordinary circumstances. The waitress, still seated at the piano, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and shared it with a room full of strangers who had become witnesses to something remarkable. The applause, the admiration, and the quiet respect of those around her created a feeling she had longed for, but had thought was out of reach. As the evening drew to a close, the young waitress continued to play softly, allowing the music to carry the guests through the final moments of the dinner. The wealthy patrons, impressed and moved, left the restaurant with smiles and a sense of wonder, talking quietly among themselves about the unexpected performance that had made the night unforgettable. Manager approached her one last time, placing a hand on her shoulder and thanking her for saving the evening. She smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond the simple acknowledgement of her skill. It was the recognition of her courage, her willingness to step forward when it mattered most, and the validation of a talent she had once feared sharing. As the staff cleaned up and the last guest departed, the waitress allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She realized that this night had changed her in ways she could not yet fully understand. The music had not only filled the room with beauty, but had also reignited a part of herself that she had long kept hidden. She felt a renewed sense of possibility, a spark of hope for the future that she had thought was lost. The grand piano sat quietly in the corner, its surface gleaming in the dim light. It had been the stage for a remarkable transformation, both for the young waitress and for everyone who had witnessed her performance. The night had started with tension, uncertainty, and fear, but it ended with admiration, joy, and a sense of wonder that would linger long after the last note had faded. And as she finally rose from the piano bench, the young waitress knew that something had shifted. She had discovered a strength within herself, a talent that demanded to be seen, and a courage that would carry her forward. The evening had been extraordinary, not just for the guests of the staff, but for her, marking the beginning of a journey that she had only just begun to imagine. The night was no longer just another shift at the restaurant. It was a turning point, a moment that would be remembered for the rest of her life. The restaurant had been transformed by her music. What had started as a tense, stressful evening had become something extraordinary. The wealthy guests, initially irritated and impatient, now sat in silence, listening intently to the melody that flowed from the young waitress's fingers. She had filled the room with warmth and elegance, and her music seemed to weave an invisible thread connecting everyone present. She had grown more confident with every note, her initial nervousness replaced by a calm focus. Each chord carried meaning, a story of perseverance, courage, and the quiet power of hidden talent. The guests leaned back in their chairs, captivated by the unexpected performance. Even those who had been skeptical at first could not help but be drawn in by the depth and emotion of her playing. The manager watched from a short distance, amazed at the transformation. The waitress, once just a background presence in the bustling restaurant, had become the center of attention, holding the room with nothing but her music. He could see the pride in her posture, the way her fingers danced across the keys, and he felt a sense of relief that went beyond saving the evening. This was something bigger, something truly remarkable. The staff, too, had been drawn into the spell of her performance. They had seen her quietly at work for months, always diligent, always reliable, but now they were witnessing a side of her they had never imagined. They exchanged glances, smiling and whispering quietly, amazed that someone so ordinary in appearance could produce something so extraordinary. It was a lesson in never judging a book by its cover, a reminder that true talent could lie hidden beneath the most unassuming surface. The guests began to whisper among themselves. They had seen many performances in their lives, attended countless events, but this was different. This was real, authentic, and personal. The young waitress had stepped into the spotlight without warning, revealing a skill that had been dormant for years. The sincerity and emotion in her playing touched everyone present, making them feel as though they were part of something intimate and special. Some guests reached for their phones, wanting to capture the moment. Others simply closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling the emotions it evoked. The melody moved through the room, soft yet powerful, carrying with it a sense of hope and beauty. The waitress played without hesitation, guided by instinct and memory, allowing the music to speak for her. Her mind wandered briefly to the past, to the times when she had dreamed of playing for an audience. Life had taken her in another direction, forcing her to put those dreams aside. But now, in this unexpected moment, they had come alive again. She could feel the little girl inside her, the one who had imagined herself performing, smiling quietly. This was the fulfillment of a dream she had almost forgotten. The melody grew richer, more expressive, as she added subtle variations and flourishes. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful, and the room responded. The tension that had filled the air earlier had vanished, replaced by a shared sense of wonder and admiration. Even the manager, who had been so worried moments ago, could not hide his astonishment and pride. The guests leaned forward, their faces softening as they listened. Some whispered to each other, marveling at the unexpected talent of the waitress, who had once seemed invisible. Others simply sat in awe, letting the music transport them, allowing themselves to be fully present in the moment. It was a rare and powerful experience, one that left a lasting impression on everyone in the room. The waitress's fingers moved with increasing confidence, her playing flowing effortlessly. She was no longer thinking about the audience or the pressure of the situation. She was lost in the music itself. It was as if the piano and she had become one, her emotions and the melody intertwined in a seamless dance. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the spell of her performance. The staff continued their duties quietly, stealing glances at her from time to time, inspired by her courage and skill. They felt a renewed sense of pride in their own work, witnessing firsthand the power of stepping forward and embracing one's abilities. The young waitress had turned a potentially disastrous evening into something magical, leaving everyone with a memory they would cherish. The wealthy guests were deeply impressed. They had attended countless dinners and events, but few had experienced anything as genuine and moving as this. The music had broken through the barriers of wealth, status, and expectation, touching everyone on a human level. It reminded them that talent and passion could emerge from the most unexpected places, that greatness was not always obvious at first glance. One guest, clearly moved, approached the manager quietly. They exchanged words in hushed tones, acknowledging the extraordinary nature of the performance. The guest's eyes returned to the waitress, filled with admiration and curiosity. They could see that this young woman had a rare gift, one that deserved recognition and encouragement. The music began to wind down, the melody softening as she approached the final notes. The room remained silent, hanging on each sound, savoring the conclusion of something beautiful. The last note lingered in the air, fading slowly, leaving a sense of fulfillment and awe. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the restaurant, a moment suspended in time. Then the applause began. It started softly, a polite acknowledgement, but quickly grew in volume and enthusiasm. The guests stood, clapping and cheering, their faces lit with genuine admiration. Some of the staff joined in, their smiles broad and uncontainable. The young waitress rose from the piano bench, her heart racing, her cheeks flushed with the thrill of the moment. The manager approached, his expression a mixture of relief and pride. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a silent thank you for saving the evening and transforming it into something remarkable. The staff gathered around, sharing their excitement and congratulating her quietly. The room was filled with warmth, a sense of shared accomplishment and appreciation. The guests returned to their seats, still talking in hushed tones about the performance they had just witnessed. Some continued to ask questions, eager to learn more about the young waitress and her background. They were intrigued by her story, inspired by her courage, and deeply moved by her talent. It was clear that she had left an indelible mark on everyone present. The young waitress felt a mix of emotions as she resumed her work, her fingers still tingling from the piano keys. She was proud, grateful, and deeply moved by the response she had received. She had stepped into the unknown, faced her fear, and created something extraordinary. The music had allowed her to express herself in a way words never could, and the experience had changed her forever. As the evening progressed, the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but the energy had shifted. The guests were more relaxed, the staff more confident, and the young waitress carried herself with a quiet strength. She had discovered something within herself, a talent and courage that could no longer be ignored. The night had been transformed from ordinary to unforgettable, and she knew that her life would never be the same. The grand piano, still gleaming in the corner, had witnessed the emergence of a hidden gift. A young waitress had taken a chance, stepping forward when the moment demanded it, and the result had been nothing short of miraculous. The room had been touched by her music, the guests inspired by her bravery, and the staff reminded of the power of recognizing potential in others. The evening ended with a sense of completion and satisfaction. The guests departed, still speaking of the unexpected performance and the talent of the young waitress who had captured their hearts. The staff cleaned up, exchanging smiles and quiet congratulations. And the young waitress, exhausted but exhilarated, knew that this night had marked the beginning of something new. She had discovered a part of herself that had been hidden for too long, and the world had taken notice. The night, which had begun with stress and uncertainty, had ended with beauty, admiration, and the affirmation that courage and talent, when embraced, could create unforgettable moments. It was a night that would remain in her memory forever, a testament to the power of stepping forward and trusting in one's own abilities. The days following that remarkable evening were unlike any the young waitress had ever experienced. The memory of her performance lingered in her mind, and even the smallest sounds, an elevator ding, a street musician playing in the distance, seemed to remind her of the music she had shared with the restaurant that night. She had stepped into a world she had once dreamed about, and it was beginning to touch her life in unexpected ways. At work, the atmosphere had shifted. Her colleagues treated her differently now. They had always respected her diligence, but admiration now accompanied that respect. Some complimented her softly, others joked that she had become famous overnight. Yet she remained humble, quietly grateful for the acknowledgement. The manager, who had once barely noticed her beyond her work ethic, now approached her more often, asking about her day, offering encouragement, and acknowledging her talent in subtle but meaningful ways. Word of the performance spread quickly. Guests who had attended that special dinner returned to the restaurant, eager to meet her again. Some asked the manager if she could play when they dined. Others mentioned her in casual conversation to friends, describing the young waitress whose piano playing had transformed an ordinary evening into a night they would never forget. She began to realize that one night could create ripples far beyond her imagination. One afternoon, as she was clearing tables and arranging silverware, a visitor arrived who would change the course of her life. A man in a tailored suit approached her quietly, with a respectful but eager demeanor. He introduced himself as someone who appreciated her talent and had witnessed her performance. He spoke kindly, acknowledging the courage it had taken for her to step forward and perform in front of a room full of wealthy and discerning guests. "You have something special," he said, his eyes reflecting genuine admiration. "Have you ever considered performing professionally? You have a rare gift." She hesitated, a mixture of disbelief and nervousness stirring within her. Her life had never been about grand stages or professional recognition. Her music had been a private refuge, a world she visited alone. Yet she felt something within her awaken a spark of possibility she had almost forgotten. I never thought about it," she admitted softly. "I've only ever played for myself, and now sometimes for others at work." The man nodded, understanding. "Your talent deserves to be shared, and I'd like to help make that happen. If you're willing, I can connect you with opportunities, scholarships, performances, people who can help you grow. It's rare to see someone with both skill and the courage to reveal it when it matters." She felt a wave of emotion, a mix of excitement, fear, and gratitude. For so long, she had thought her dreams were out of reach, and now someone was offering her a chance to step into them fully. She realized that the moment she had taken at the piano was not just about saving a dinner. It was the first step towards something much larger, a door opening to a future she had long imagined but never dared to pursue. Over the next few weeks, opportunities began to appear. She received invitations to perform at local events, private gatherings, and even small concerts. The experience was overwhelming at first. The thought of performing in front of an audience beyond the restaurant was both thrilling and terrifying. She practiced diligently, revisiting old pieces she had loved as a child and exploring new ones that challenged her abilities. Each performance, no matter how small, reinforced her confidence. She discovered that the fear she had felt initially could be transformed into energy, a driving force that made her play with more emotion and depth. Audiences responded with warmth and admiration, and she began to feel a sense of belonging in a world she had once only dreamed of. At the restaurant, her colleagues continued to watch her in awe, inspired by her journey. The manager supported her fully, adjusting her schedule to allow time for practice and performances, offering advice and celebrating each success. The staff treated her with respect and pride, recognizing that her courage and talent had brought not only recognition to herself, but also a sense of pride to the entire team. One evening, after a particularly successful performance at a small concert hall, she returned to the restaurant to find a letter waiting for her. It was an invitation to audition for a prestigious music program, one that could open doors to professional opportunities she had never imagined. Her hands trembled as she read the words, and tears of joy welled up in her eyes. She realized that the night at the restaurant, the night she had taken a risk and played for strangers, had set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. The days became a balancing act between work, practice, and new opportunities. She learned to manage her time carefully, to prioritize her goals while still fulfilling her responsibilities at the restaurant. The experience taught her discipline, resilience, and the importance of embracing chances when they arise. She also learned to trust herself, to believe in her abilities and in the value of her voice, both literal and metaphorical. The wealthy guests who had first witnessed her performance continued to visit, often requesting that she play. They treated her with respect and admiration, but more importantly, they recognized her as a person with talent and passion, not just a member of the staff. Each interaction reinforced her confidence, reminding her that her skills and courage had value beyond the restaurant walls. As the months passed, her reputation grew. Local media outlets picked up on her story, highlighting the young waitress, who had turned the tense evening into a musical triumph. Interviews followed, and she found herself sharing her journey with wider audiences, speaking about courage, persistence, and the power of following one's dreams. Her story inspired others, showing that talent, combined with bravery and dedication, could create opportunities that might have once seemed impossible. Through it all, she remained grounded, never forgetting the quiet moments of practice in the empty restaurant, the nervous energy before stepping up to the piano, and the sense of joy and fulfillment she had felt when the music flowed freely. She understood that success was not only about recognition, but also about the personal growth and courage it took to pursue one's passion. Her life had changed in ways she could never have predicted. She had discovered her own strength, gained opportunities she had never imagined, and inspired others with her story. The young waitress who had once moved quietly through life, unnoticed, had become a symbol of courage and talent, showing that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they dared to step forward. And yet, despite all the changes, she remained humble. She continued to serve at the restaurant when she could, sharing her music and presence with those who had witnessed her first step into the spotlight. She valued the connections she had with her colleagues, the manager who had supported her, and the guests who had recognized her talent and helped her take the next step. Each day reminded her that while opportunity could appear suddenly, it was her dedication, courage, and humility that allowed her to embrace it fully. The night she had performed at the restaurant remained etched in her memory as a turning point, the moment when possibility became reality. It had been the beginning of a journey that had brought recognition, growth, and a renewed sense of purpose. The young waitress had discovered that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could lead to the most extraordinary transformations. And she carried that lesson with her as she stepped into the future she had long dreamed of but never dared to imagine. The months following her rise into unexpected recognition were filled with both challenges and triumphs. The young waitress, once known only for her quiet diligence and careful attention to detail, now navigated a world full of opportunities she had never imagined. Invitations to perform in small venues, private gatherings, and community events arrived steadily. With each performance, her confidence grew as she began to see herself not just as a waitress or someone with hidden talent, but as a musician with a purpose and a voice that could touch others. Her routine had changed. Mornings were still spent at the restaurant, ensuring everything ran smoothly and greeting guests with her gentle smile. Afternoons were reserved for practice, lessons, and preparation for upcoming performances. Evenings were often dedicated to events, concerts, or small gatherings where she shared her music. It was a demanding schedule, but one she embraced wholeheartedly. She felt alive in a way she never had before, each day carrying the promise of growth and possibility. Her colleagues at the restaurant continued to support her. They no longer saw her only as a server, but as someone who had transformed their shared environment with their courage and talent. The manager, once nervous and doubtful, now relied on her not only for her work, but also for inspiration. He often remarked to new staff how important it was to recognize potential in people, using her story as an example. A young waitress, however, remained humble, acknowledging their support and understanding that her journey was shared with those who had believed in her from the beginning. One afternoon, she received a call from a larger music venue in the city. They had heard about her performance at the restaurant and wanted to offer her a solo spot at an upcoming recital. She was both thrilled and nervous. This was a significant opportunity, one that could open doors to a professional career in music. Yet, the thought of performing in front of a much larger audience, far beyond the familiar faces of restaurant guests, brought a flutter of anxiety. She spent the following weeks preparing meticulously. Every note, every chord, every nuance of her performance was practiced and refined. She revisited old pieces that had once been her comfort and explored new compositions that challenged her abilities. She also spent time reflecting on the journey that had brought her here the night. At the restaurant, the moments of doubt and courage, the support of friends, and the encouragement of those who believed in her talent. Each reflection reinforced her determination to embrace the opportunity fully. The day of the recital arrived. The venue was grand, with high ceilings, rows of seats filled with expectant audience members, and the soft hum of excitement in the air. She felt the familiar tension of nerves, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of purpose and anticipation. She had prepared, she had practiced, and she had learned to trust herself. She walked to the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys, feeling the instrument welcome her touch. As she began to play, the music flowed effortlessly. The opening notes were delicate, drawing the audience in, and soon the melody grew richer and more expressive. Each chord carried emotion, telling a story of perseverance, courage, and the power of believing in oneself. The audience was captivated, silent, except for the soft sound of the piano filling the hall. Her nerves faded, replaced by a deep connection to the music and the people listening. The young waitress, now a performer, moved through the pieces with grace and confidence. She experimented with dynamics, tempo, and phrasing, allowing the music to breathe and flow naturally. The audience responded with rapt attention, some closing their eyes, others leaning forward, completely immersed in the performance. It was a transformative moment, not just for her, but for everyone in the hall, a shared experience that resonated with emotion and authenticity. When the final notes lingered and faded into silence, the audience erupted in applause. It started as a polite clapping, but quickly grew into cheers and standing ovations. Tears welled in her eyes as she bowed, feeling the overwhelming appreciation and recognition of her efforts. This was more than a successful performance. It was the realization of a dream she had almost forgotten, a confirmation that her courage and persistence had led her to a new life. After the recital, she was approached by several music teachers, event organizers, and fellow performers who wanted to offer guidance, collaboration, and opportunities for further growth. Each conversation reinforced her understanding that her life had changed dramatically. She had discovered her voice, not only musically, but also in her self-confidence and ability to navigate new challenges. Her path was no longer limited to the restaurant. It had expanded into a broader world filled with possibilities. She returned to the restaurant the next day, greeted with admiration and curiosity by her colleagues and regular guests. They asked about the recital, praised her performance, and shared their excitement for her future endeavors. The young waitress felt a deep sense of gratitude, understanding that her journey had begun in that restaurant, with the support of people who believed in her and the courage to take a chance. When it mattered most, as weeks turned into months, she continued to balance her work at the restaurant with her musical pursuits. She performed at local events, received invitations to larger stages, and even began to mentor younger musicians, sharing the lessons she had learned about courage, practice, and embracing opportunities. Her story became an inspiration to many, showing that talent could emerge from the most unexpected places and that taking risks could lead to extraordinary results. The young waitress reflected often on that first night when she had stepped up to the piano in a moment of uncertainty. She realized that it was not just her skill that had made the night remarkable, but also her willingness to embrace the unknown. That single act of courage had opened doors, transformed perceptions, and set her on a path she had never thought possible. She had learned that sometimes life presents moments that demand bravery, and the choice to step forward can change everything. Her performances continued to gain attention, and she eventually found herself invited to prestigious music festivals and events in other cities. Each performance reinforced her sense of purpose and allowed her to connect with audiences in meaningful ways. She remained grounded, however, remembering her beginnings and the people who had supported her along the way. The restaurant, her colleagues, and the manager who had believed in her first remained a cherished part of her journey. Through it all, she discovered the true meaning of success. It was not measured solely by applause, recognition, or invitations, but by the personal growth and fulfillment that came from embracing one's passions and taking risks. She learned to trust herself, to value her talent, and to recognize the power of perseverance. Her story became a testament to the idea that courage, humility, and dedication could transform ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. The young waitress who had once moved quietly through the restaurant had become a musician admired by many. Her life had shifted in ways she had never imagined, yet she remained the same person at heart, kind, humble, and dedicated. She understood that her journey was ongoing, with new challenges and opportunities always ahead, but she faced them with confidence and grace. And so, the story of the waitress who stunned everyone with her piano performance came to symbolize more than a single night. It became a narrative of hope, courage, and transformation, illustrating how one moment of bravery can open doors to a lifetime of possibilities. She continued to play, to inspire, and to live fully, carrying with her the lessons, experiences, and dreams that had begun with a simple, unforgettable evening at the restaurant.